All right, let's get started. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I think to all the folks who are joining us from all over the world, it's great to see so many people joining us from all around the world. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. I'm really excited today to have our one of our lead solutions engineers, Derek Ross, present to you his presentation or webinar on scaling your mobile testing strategy. So before we get started, I wanted to just go through a few quick housekeeping pointers. So today's webinar will run for 60 minutes. We'll try to complete in 50 minutes and save about 10 minutes in the end for any questions. The webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing this recording with all of you in the next few days once the webinar is over. It'll also be published on our YouTube channel. All participants will be muted, and so that we can basically present without any interruptions. And yeah, please use the Q&A button on the Zoom interface to ask questions at any point during the webinar, and we will basically go through as many questions as we can towards the end of the webinar, save about 10-15 minutes for that, and try to address all of your questions. All right, let's get started. So quickly, before I hand it over to Derek, just wanted to spend a little bit of time going through the history of BrowserStack. So we launched 10 years ago. Actually, we're coming up on our 10th anniversary soon. And we've been, when Ritesh and Nakul, our co-founders, launched BrowserStack, they launched it to solve one problem, which is, they wanted to test their website on IE, and they didn't have access to an Internet Explorer browser on their machine. And they spent more time trying to test their website than they did building it. And that sort of was the inspiration for them to build BrowserStack. We hit our first 1,000 customers in 6 months in February. And I think since then it's been onwards and upwards for us. We've launched a platform of real iOS and Android devices. We launched app testing, so you can test your native mobile apps in 2017 and 2018. We also raised our first round of funding from Excel in 2018, 50 million in Series A. We acquired Percy, the visual testing and review tool, in July of last year, and we raised our Series B and officially became a unicorn just a few months ago, and our current valuation is 4 billion. And I just found out that we were named to the Cloud 100 by Forbes, so it's another accolade to add to our list. We are trusted by 50,000 plus customers from all over the world across different verticals. So we've got some of the best brands across the different verticals, including Barclays from finance. We've got some of the top technology companies like Microsoft, Twitter, Oracle, Amazon, and Spotify, and many more who use BrowserStack to test their websites and mobile apps. We also have a wide variety of open source projects who use BrowserStack to test their projects and make the internet more compatible. So projects like jQuery, Angular, Ember use BrowserStack to test their open source projects. We've got 4 million registered users on our platform. Our platform runs our users run 72 billion cylinder commands a year on our platform. We've got customers from over 135 countries, and we've got 15 globally distributed data centers. Some of the world's largest cloud providers rely on BrowserStack. So Amazon, Google, Oracle, Microsoft all use BrowserStack to test their websites and mobile apps. Just a quick overview of our products. So we've broadly categorized our products into web testing and mobile application testing, and we've got a few free tools. On the web testing side, we've got Live, which is our interactive or manual cross-browser testing tool, through which you can basically load up your websites on browsers, desktop browsers, and on real mobile devices, both on iOS and Android. We've got Automate, which is our Selenium grid on the cloud, which allows you to run your Selenium tests on the 2,000 plus browsers and devices that we support on the BrowserStack platform. And we've got our latest edition, which is Percy, which allows you to do visual testing and review in an automated way. So make sure that visually your website is looking the way it's supposed to, that it is conforming to the design, original design that you had planned, for your particular website. Again, across different browsers. We have two mobile app testing products, App Live and App Automate. So both of these allow you to test your mobile apps, native and hybrid mobile apps on iOS, real iOS and Android devices. With App Automate, you can run your automated tests on different frameworks. So we support Appium, Earl Grey, Espresso, and XCUI. And we've got a bunch of free tools. So if you want to check how your website looks on different browsers, you can use screenshots. If you want to see how your website renders on different breakpoints, in your responsive design, you can use responsive. And our latest addition here is Speed Lab, which allows you to understand the performance of your website on different browsers and devices. So we've come up with our own performance score, and you can use Speed Lab to understand if your website is particularly fast or slow on a particular set of browsers or devices. We are also, with this webinar, we are providing a BrowserStack pack. The team will be sharing the link to the BrowserStack pack on the chat interface. Encourage all of you to redeem this. This will give you free access to all of our products. So you can give all of our products a run and, get started, get your tests integrated with BrowserStack and understand, how BrowserStack can help you meet your testing goals and your build time goals. So please make sure that you check out that link that's being shared in the chat box. All right, let's move on quickly. Let me introduce Derek, our speaker for today. So Derek is a lead solutions engineer at BrowserStack. In the last 10 years, he's worked at Verizon, GE, and T-Mobile as a Scrum Master, as a DevOps engineer, and as a technical product engineer. So he's got a lot of deep experience in the DevOps space and really understands how different organizations do testing, release software, and what DevOps pipelines look like. He's also got sort of really cool background working in the he served in the US Army Special Forces, and I think that sort of gives a unique angle, unique experience to everything that he does at BrowserStack. So I'd like to sort of before I hand it over to Derek, maybe I'll just sort of make one more announcement. The team will also be sharing a poll right now on the screen. If you could just take a moment to give us your feedback. We are constantly trying to understand what kind of topics you'd like to hear from us about. What are the different kinds of speakers, the different sort of areas of expertise that you'd like us to cover, and just give us some feedback on where you are at, what are the topics you're interested in, and we'll try to sort of make sure that we cover some of those areas in our future webinars. With that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Derek.
Good morning, good evening, afternoon. Thanks everybody for coming onto the webinar. Let me share my screen here. So thanks for that great introduction. My name is Derek Ross. I'm a lead solutions engineer here at BrowserStack. And I get to bring some unique perspectives to my customers, having been a customer myself, and then also someone who's been a solutions engineer for years and gotten to implement with lots of customers. I've gotten to see lots of strategies on how mobile and desktop testing is done, and what to do and what does not work. So what are we actually talking about? What are the applications under test? So typically we have three types of applications. We have native applications. And those are going to be faster and more reliable than any other type of application. That gives us access to the root features of a device. So we get specific features such as interacting with Siri or Google. We have specific camera functionality. We have access to all kinds of core functionality in the hardware as we're creating our products. One of the things that makes us make these products better is that there's a standardized release process, and there's lots of visibility in the app or Play Store. So there's lots of review processes that you have to go through in order to get your production release put into those stores. For Android, you're going to be writing in Java or Kotlin. So there's only two languages that you're going to be interacting with, and there's a large number of device manufacturers that you have, so a large customer base that you have access to with your product. And for iOS, you're going to be writing most recently in Swift, but in the past, we've had to use Objective-C for iOS development. There's a large customer base, especially in the US and depending on the market that you're working in for iOS. And there are very stringent application standards to gain and keep access to the App Store. The other types of applications that we are going to be testing are web applications, where we're going to have some a little bit easier to maintain due to the platform flexibility. All we have to do is build for a browser, and that can be deployed anywhere and used by any device, whether it's desktop or mobile. We had a single code base, so we only have one team developing rather than two. We have we're unable to access device features. So the GPS, push notifications, text messages, we're not able to gain access to those. So we have to use alternative methods to use some of these use cases. And we have lower performance. To get the best of both worlds, we can use a hybrid application. So we can develop common features across multiple platforms using web views. And then we can access device APIs directly. So we can use Android or iOS APIs directly, so you can use location, GPS, camera, Siri, Google, etc. So how do we test these things? We have a couple ways, or a few ways that we do that. Some of the most popular ways are what I'm going to talk about today. So testing mobile applications, you have native frameworks, and those native frameworks consist of XCUI and Espresso. And those fall in the box of white box testing. And what white box testing means is that you have the ability to see the code, and you have the ability to manipulate that code. And so typically developers who are writing iOS applications or writing Android applications, they're very familiar with their code base. And because of that, they choose to use the testing frameworks that are native to their IDE and their development process. And so for iOS, that's going to be Xcode user interface testing. And for Android, which is XCUI. And then for Android, that's going to be Espresso. With XCUI, we're going to be writing our tests in Swift. And because the developers are already writing all the application code in Swift, there's a really low learning curve to understand how the framework works and all the things that you can do within it. You're going to be using the same IDE, so you're just working right in the Xcode IDE, and there's built-in simulators that you can download and install into your local laptop in order to execute those tests while you're designing, and a lot of people use those even for their production testing. With Espresso, same benefits. We have a low learning curve for developers. They're already writing in Java or Kotlin. We're integrated directly into Android Studio. But the problem with it, or one of the limitations of it, is that it's going to be Android only. So again, this is typically chosen by developers when they're looking at their test strategy, if they're going to implement a test strategy for mobile. How do we execute these XCUI and Espresso tests? So typically when you get started, you're going to start with local execution, and there's some limitations to that. I definitely do not recommend that local execution on your laptop be the primary source of execution for your regression test. It is a good place to conduct your design phase. It gives you quick feedback loop if you're executing against the emulator or a simulator. It's fairly simple to set up since you already have Xcode or Android Studio installed. There's natively built simulators in iOS, and there's natively built emulators in Android Studio that you can download. And there is parallelism available in Xcode via multiple simulators. Same thing in Espresso via multiple emulators. But what you can do is you can do remote execution on BrowserStack. And so if you want to sign up for BrowserStack, all you need to do to take those tests and scale those are to get your username and access key. You can build a debug application and a test runner, which we're going to be going through here shortly. For Android, that'll look like those two commands that I have here, where you have some Gradle commands that are going to allow you to build your APKs. And with iOS, you're going to be able to build your IPAs, and there's some documentation here. You'll get the slides after the presentation that you can use to go through and understand what you need to do in Xcode to output the IPAs necessary to run your test on a platform like BrowserStack. The other option for testing is Appium. Appium is a great framework. It's been around for a while. It's based on Selenium. So anybody who's run Selenium tests for desktop has a fairly short learning curve to understand how Appium works and to migrate their skills to Appium for the mobile platforms. This is going to take the approach of black box testing. So black box testing is the idea that all of the source code is in a box and you cannot see it. So you don't technically have to understand how the source code works in order to write an Appium test or to take full advantage of Appium. And that really gives you the user perspective. So as a user, I can't manipulate the app. If I go on and I download an app onto my iPhone and I go through a purchase flow, I can't go and manipulate data in the app. I can't interact with it any other way than it was meant to be interacted with. And that's the way Appium works. No controller access to the underlying OS or API. It's compatible with multiple language bindings. And so this is one of the real benefits of using Appium, is that you can choose whatever language you want to write in, whether you want to write in Java, JavaScript, Python, Ruby, C#. There's bindings available for all of the different languages that your team could possibly want to use. This is typically chosen by QA teams or centralized testing teams because it supports cross-platform testing. So I have customers who have mobile testing teams who support both their iOS and their Android teams. And rather than use Espresso and XCUI, where they'd have to write 2 sets of tests for one scenario across 2 different apps, they write it in Appium so that they can take that same script and run it across multiple devices. There are cheaper development costs that come with this due to the fact that you only have to write test once, so you only need one team to do it. But that can kind of be mitigated on a development team that's using XCUI or Espresso, since they're already there being utilized. It is quite complex to set up for your first time locally. So if you've ever been in an Appium webinar or an Appium workshop where you've had to show up with your laptop with a fairly clean laptop, a fairly clean working environment, install all of the dependencies necessary to run it, it can get a little complex. You have to have an Appium server. There's Appium desktop that allows you to interact with the emulators, simulators, or real devices that you have connected to your laptop. And then if you want to scale that internally, you need to set up remote devices or emulators and simulators, and that can get very complex very quickly. And it's a slower execution speed than native frameworks. So if you're using XCUI or Espresso, you're compiling your test into a runner, and those are getting shipped to the device. And so they're running right coincided with the code that they're testing. Where with Appium, we're using the mobile JSON wire protocol. So what happens there is anytime you send a command to the application, it's just like Selenium sending a command to the browser. So you go to a URL, that's one command, and that goes over from your test runner over the internet to your target device to tell it what to do next. And then you ask it to find an element, you ask it to read that element, you ask it to click on a button, you ask it to send keys to actually input some text. So every single time that you do that, you're sending a command over the internet. So the performance there's definitely latency involved in running Appium test. How do we execute it? So again, we can do local execution. We can have emulators and simulators on our laptops that we run. We can have a real device connected via USB to our laptop, and that allows us to run the test against that laptop, against those devices. It's definitely not to be used as a primary source of execution for regression. I have seen customers start there and do that, and that can lead to a whole plethora of issues. And I've seen it as a customer when I was putting a test strategy in at both GE and T-Mobile, where if you're executing locally, you don't always get the full story of what the testing actually looked like. You don't get a single source of truth. You have to decide here whether you're going to use real devices versus emulators and simulators locally, and what can you afford and what's easiest to set up for you. And then you have to set up your Appium server, Appium desktop, and if you want to set up multiple devices, then you need to set up a Selenium grid with Appium controlling the devices for you. Or you can just make it easy on yourself and you can let someone handle all of that business for you. And you can do remote execution, and all you need is a few things to get started. You need to upload your app. You need to know where to point your test at, a host, have an account with a username and access key, and set your desired capabilities, which we'll be demoing for you here shortly. So internal versus external scaling. So we can definitely scale internally without using a service. So the parallelism with Appium consists of setting up multiple iOS simulators or multiple iOS real devices. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to connect those to your laptop, and you're going to be able to take multiple sessions, can be distributed on individual simulators, but multiple sessions cannot be put onto a single device. So you can't have one device and run, let's say you have 2 apps, you cannot run the test across those 2 apps. You can only control one test at a time per device or simulator. And the way you specify those target devices is you need to have the unique device ID of that particular device or simulator. If you're using a simulator, you're probably going to be targeting with a device name and a platform version, and it's going to find it's going to find something that matches that on your laptop. With iOS real devices, you're going to specify the UDID, and then you also need to let it know what local port you're using and the derived data path. And this is going to stop you, especially if you have multiple devices connected, it's going to stop tests from stepping on each other. And so these are some of the gotchas that you have to think about as you start connecting devices to your laptop and you're trying to orchestrate parallelism on your devices. With Android, you have emulators and real devices that you can use. You can connect those through Android Studio. You're going to specify your target devices with UDID again. If you have web views, you're going to let it know what Chrome driver port you have or Chrome. And then you're going to have your MJPEG server port and system port. And those are going to similarly stop you from stepping on multiple devices and keep your data streams clear. If you wanted to set up something remote, so if you have a large company and you have multiple teams and you want to provide a service internally for your team, you can set up an Appium grid. This is built on Selenium Grid. It's going to require you to procure and configure local or cloud machines. And I've seen multiple ways of do this. I've seen AWS and Google Cloud used to set up the nodes. I've seen Mac minis set up in large data rooms, set up as a mini data center with device racks set up with a bunch of devices, and then also a bunch of Android devices connected. And I'll be quite frank, I've seen a lot more success with Android versus iOS, and the cost starts to go up exponentially with iOS as you're connecting Mac minis to one or multiple devices. This requires you to procure and configure target devices for both iOS or Android. So the devices have to be configured to work with the grid. They have to be powered. They have to be maintained. The software has to be updated. There's quite a bit of maintenance that goes into maintaining these to have a robust and secure testing grid. You're going to have to configure each of your nodes to interact with iOS or Android and have the proper equipment to do that. And then you're going to have to set up a framework or talk to your developers in order to target that grid. So they're going to use either an internal DNS host name or the IP of the grid. And then they're going to target each platform based on how you set up that hub for device name and platform version per device. And anytime a new device comes out or you find out your customers are purchasing new devices to interact with your application, you're going to have to add those to the grid and continue adding those configurations. It's definitely not a fire and forget operation, and usually takes a full-time team to maintain all of this. Then there comes issues with that outside of the cost and the maintenance that come with that. Typically, I don't see customers writing cleanup scripts to get their devices back to the original state. So if I run a test on my device and I set up test data, I use Derek Ross's name, I use Derek Ross's credit card, and then I go back to try to rerun, a lot of that data gets left behind. So my device state is not the same as when I ran the last test. And so I get false failures, false positives. I get flakiness in my test due to the way these devices are configured. It's a costly effort to set up and maintain. So a lot of times we think it can be cheaper to build. But if you think about it in your home, if you have no idea what you're doing with your plumbing and you decide to go install a whole new bathroom, you can end up costing yourself a lot more money than it would just to hire somebody who knows what they're doing to come in and do it right the first time. Reporting mechanisms aren't included with setting up a grid. So if you want to have videos, screenshot, network logs. That's a whole lot of other infrastructure and software that you have to install and build around your grid solution in order to make sure that your developers and your testers have all of the debugging tools necessary to utilize the test results to fix the bugs that you're going after anyways. So a lot of mechanisms need to be built into your pipeline and into your test automation grid in order to make these extremely useful and robust. With native frameworks, we have the ability to run parallelism as well. So XCUI with Xcode 9 and further gave us the ability to do multiple simulators. So we could run the same test on different devices, and then we have the ability to shard test, which means that we could take a suite A and suite B of one large regression suite, and we can run those and distribute them across different devices. The way we target those is by the platform name and OS of the device that we want to target. If we want to connect real devices to our laptops and run those, we need the unique device UDID, and typically those have to be built into the runners and the applications that we build so we can target those devices. It's a limited number of devices that you can actually connect to an individual laptop, and you're also limited by the hardware capabilities of that host. So you can only run so many, and so you're only able to run parallelism on maybe 2 to 4 to 5 devices, depending on how robust your machine is. Again, we run into the same issues of no videos, no screenshots, logs that can be easily shared with other teams without building additional infrastructure and services. Our real devices are not reset back to original state. Our simulators are, but real devices are not. And anytime that new devices come out or any kind of iOS updates come out, we're going to have to procure new devices, or we're going to have to maintain the existing devices to make sure those are up to date. And a lot of those times, those devices just sit in somebody's desk until testing needs to be done. And then updating and configuring is part of the release cycle, which contributes to the bottleneck of testing. With Espresso, sharding is definitely built in, and you have the ability to specify which test classes or packages that you want to run on each device. It provides the ability to execute on different devices, and you can run devices or emulators locally on your machine. You can only run one test at a time on each device in serial, and so you're limited by the amount of devices and emulators and emulators that you can run on that machine. The way we target those is we get a list of connected machines on our device, so we can run the command ADB devices, and that's going to give us a list of emulators and real devices connected to Android Studio and allow us to name those as we're running our test. We're limited by the hardware capabilities of the host machine, and we run into the issues that we run into with Appium and XCUI with local execution of video, screenshots, logs, and building all the debugging infrastructure around it. So why should we buy instead of build, and what options do we get? Well, with BrowserStack, you get, and this is unique to us in the industry, as we have 15 data centers distributed across the globe. And it's one of my favorite things about working at BrowserStack is that we're very developer focused and we're very CI/CD and pipeline focused. And because of that, we have data centers all over the globe. So if you're using Appium, that's going to reduce your latency to the maximum ability that we possibly can by co-locating your test as close to your test runner to the data center as possible. So if you're in India, you're executing against Indian data centers. If you're in Australia, you're executing against Australian data centers. If you're in North America, you have multiple options to route to. And on top of having close geographic locations to make sure latency is the lowest that it could possibly be, we have failover. Not one time in the entire time I've been a BrowserStack customer or worked at BrowserStack has my pipeline gone down because there was not an available device because of an outage. If one data center is down, we have plenty of other data centers to route you to ensure that you have all of the uptime that you need in order to use BrowserStack as a gating service as you're moving forward. And not only do we have data centers distributed across the globe, but we have people distributed across the globe. So we have solutions engineers, solutions architects, support systems, co-located all across the globe to help you out with your mobile testing and to make sure that you're always up and that you have the most efficient setup as possible. With BrowserStack, you're going to gain the ability to execute Appium, XCUI, Espresso, and as mentioned earlier, even Earl Grey if you want to run that framework on us. We have reporting capabilities built in. So there's test analytics built in. You have test results that have videos, screenshots, and then you can enable device logs, network logs, test framework logs easily just by putting a flag into our CLI or into our REST API as you're calling out to initiate these tests. You gain partnership and expertise from industry subject matter experts. So when I got started with BrowserStack, the fact that I had a solutions engineer coming into my company before COVID and actually giving presentations in person, and now we do quite a bit over the phone, over Zoom meetings, and you have the ability to have somebody walk you through that journey. If anybody here has ever climbed a mountain or gone or done something very complex and difficult, it's so much nicer to have a guide to help you understand where to go, where to take breaks, where to find food, where the easiest places to find water are. It makes your experience a lot more enjoyable and a lot easier if you have a guide. And that's what the subject matter experts at BrowserStack provide to you, is we give you a guide. So one, we know what questions you're going to ask or need to ask before you even do, because we've seen this so many times. And rather than banging your head against the wall and not understanding how to do something, you have somebody that can quickly give you an answer when questions do come up. We're just an email away, a Slack message away, or a meeting away in order to help you with your testing. You have access to a large array of devices across iOS and Android platforms. So as devices are coming out, we're constantly adding devices, and you're never going to wait on a device. We have devices set up based on popularity of usage and geographic locations. We follow up with our customers to understand what the customer bases are using, and we make sure that we have enough devices so that your organization never has to wait. So if you need an iPhone XS with iOS 14 on it, and you need to execute 40 tests on that, you have the ability to execute 40 to 80 parallel tests on that. And that's not going to affect another customer because we're going to make sure that we have a deep bench of devices to make sure that you're not waiting on those. We have APIs to interact with your test assets and your data. So if you need to pull any information, we work with healthcare customers, financial institutions that need to prove that they ran tests on their applications before that they can put these out into production. And so a lot of times they'll use our APIs to pull this data down, pull the videos, pull the device logs, and make sure that those are stored somewhere where they do have that proof. And also it's a great way to ship information directly to your developers to make sure that they're able to work with the debugging tools. It gives you a single reporting mechanism. So unlike having tests running locally, having the test results put into a PowerPoint, and your contractor inevitably coming to a presentation and saying, I have a 98% pass rate, this is going to give you the ability to have a single source of truth and a single reporting mechanism. And it's going to simplify your parallel execution, because rather than having to set everything up, you're just going to set a few flags, you're going to point at us, and you're going to forget about it, and you're going to let it run. Some best practices for CI/CD as you're doing this. So one is to understand your your software development lifecycle. If you don't do that, then the rest of everything down the road just gets way harder. And a lot of teams don't truly cross-train all of the personnel on the team to fully understand. So one of the things that was mentioned earlier is that I was a Green Beret, and I had a special forces background, and I was a medical person, and I couldn't always scale my medical skills when there was an incident in order to see all of the patients at once. And so what I would do before I would deploy is the rest of my team would get trained to do basic tasks, and they would understand my job. And they would do the same thing with me, whether it be the communications guys, the weapons guys, whoever it was on the team. They would explain their jobs to us at a level to where we at least knew what was going on so that we understood the entire process of an operation. And it's the same thing with software development. Not only a tester shouldn't only understand the testing cycle, and a developer shouldn't only understand the development cycle, and the product owner shouldn't only understand the design phase and the planning phase. We should all understand the entire software development lifecycle. So when I go in and I work with a new team, the very first question I ask is, how do we get an idea from a product owner's head to production, and what is every step, both manual and automated, that occurs between those 2 points? And that gives us a list of steps that we can start understanding where we want to automate and how the process actually works, and gives us a place to start breaking up our tests to understand how best to implement those at different places. Once we understand that, we need some kind of event-based trigger to give us the ability to separate those tests, separate those build tasks, those deployment tasks, And that's where a standardized branching strategy comes in. And I like to start with Git flow, but because that allows for a solid understanding with lots of documentation, but it really doesn't matter what you do. You can really do any branching strategy and have any naming convention as long as it's standardized across the business. This allows for event-based pipelines to be created and allows for the robust use of webhooks to deliver information to different disparate different systems across the pipeline. When you're configuring CI, some principles I like to discuss is always use CI as code. The majority of customers are going to be starting out with freestyle jobs, and this is language that comes from Jenkins. A freestyle job is a UI-based job where you're going in and you're clicking and you're configuring the job in the UI. But it's a lot more robust and portable if you maintain it as a Jenkins file, or if you're using Travis, a travis.yaml, or whatever CI tool you're using, their code configuration option is the best way to go. And so whenever you have a machine go down, you need to set up a new Jenkins or you need to execute locally, your job doesn't change and you have all of those automated and manual steps written into a file that creates your pipeline. And then keep that portable. The way I like to do it, based on my experiences as a DevOps engineer and having to constantly move things and rebuild new pipelines for other teams, is I like to keep 70% of my configurations as scripts. Typically, I like to use Node.js, but you can use Bash, you can use Groovy, you can use whatever language it is that you like to use for scripting. But 70% of your configurations should be scripted in a coding language like that. 20% of your configurations are needed to be kept in the CI file. So your steps, your stages, the actual shell commands where you're going to run your scripts, those are going to be kept in the CI file. And then 10% of the configurations are going to be maintained in the UI as CI code. And then artifact version. Each version should have a story attached to it, and you're going to create tooling that tells the story of the build. So it tells the entire story from A to Z of how that worked. We want to know what test happened, who touched the artifact and why, and did it hit every part of a standardized deployment process. And some best practices for BrowserStack. We're going to want to label our tests. We're going to want to make sure we're using our debugging tools. And we have the option to test behind the firewall, and we have multiple integrations. So we've done enough talking. We're going to go ahead and jump into a demo, and we're going to go over a lot of the things that I just talked about in the slides. So I'm going to show how to upload apps to BrowserStack and how to take tests from local execution to scale them on BrowserStack with multiple devices. And we're going to start out with Espresso here. So here, what I talked about having a local simulator, I've installed this local emulator here. And the way that I've done this is I've used the AVD manager and Android Studio. So if I go to tools and I go to my AVD manager, you can see that you can download and create multiple devices. So if I wanted to create a new virtual device, I can click here. I can select a TV, a phone, a Wear OS device. I can download whichever API that I want to download for these devices. And so you can see here, I've got a Pixel XL with Android 9. I've got Android 10, and I can run parallelism across these devices. But one, they take memory on my machine, takes resources on my machine. And if I'm going to execute across multiple devices, I'm limited by the amount of memory that I have to manage all of the processes that are going to happen with these devices. So if I want to execute locally, I can select a device from the dropdown. I can play that, and that's going to run some ADB commands. It's going to bring that calculator app up in the device, and it's going to run those. As you can see, if I wanted to have screenshots, videos, if I wanted to have something that I could distribute to my team, JUnit reports, those are going to all show up in my local directories. And then I have to either manually move those or create tooling that's going to store those and present those to the rest of the organization. So we just ran all of those in serial, but now I want to be able to scale those. So we talked about being able to scale those with multiple emulators. We talked about building a grid, but moving it to BrowserStack is really easy. All we need to do is actually build our tools. So what we can do is we can build our bundles, we could build our APKs, or directly from the terminal, I can run commands that are going to build that app for me. So I've already done that for the sake of time. I've done that, and I've got in my build directory, I've got different APKs. So the way we actually run these on BrowserStack is we have the BrowserStack CLI. The CLI wraps our API. And so you can see here, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to authenticate, which I've already done. And now I have access to my BrowserStack account with my username and my access key. To access App Automate, I'm going to look for App Automate, and I have the ability to see the list of apps I have, the test suites, and then I can interact with Appium, XCUI, or Espresso. And we're going to interact with Espresso today. So within Espresso, we have the ability to run test, which is what we're about to do. We can see the list of builds that we have within projects. We can see our sessions, and we can debug our test. So we're going to run, and we get a long list of flags that we have the ability to work with. So locally, we can do sharding. We can shard across different devices. We can take screenshots with a framework like Spoon. We can upload media. And we can do all of this with flags with BrowserStack. So we're going to pass the app, the test suite, the list of devices. So gaining parallelism and having an additional number of devices is as easy as creating a list of devices. And we have an example here of how to target 2 different devices. So we're going to go ahead and run our test. We're going to run it across one device, just like we are locally here. So we're going to do a -A, which is going to be our app. And where I have my app delivered is in the debug folder. So I'm going to copy and paste that. We have our app debug. I'm going to pass it the test. So I'm going to run a -T. And that's going to run to my APK that has my test runner. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my list of devices. So I'm going to have a comma separated list within quotes that's going to target my devices. So right now we're going to do one device. We're going to do a Google Nexus. So I have a Google Nexus 6 with API 6, and I'm going to run that. And because I have the Spoon framework taking screenshots for me, I'm going to set the Spoon framework to true. So I'm going to enable Spoon framework to true. I'm going to clean this up. One of the best practices I have is doing -- project, which is going to label my project with this mobile testing webinar. And that's going to allow for my analytics to have everything I need it to have. So the very first thing it's going to handle is uploading my app, uploading my test, and then it's going to send me the build ID. So I have a success message here. I know that that's working. I'm going to take this build ID here. And I can see this project running. So I have this Espresso test running. It's running across a Google Nexus 6 on 6.0. So now if I want to scale this, as easy as adding more devices, all I need to do is add a list of more devices. So now in my -D, I have the 6.0, I have a 1+ with 6T with 9.0, an S8 with 7.0, and an S9 with 8.0. I have my Spoon framework enabled, and now I want to add debugging tools. So I'm going to do -- network logs set to true. I'm going to have my project set to mobile testing webinar, and then I'm also going to set -- device logs to true. So now I have 2 executions happening with just a few minutes, and I've gone from having a single device to targeting multiple devices. There's a lot more advanced flags that I could jump into if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do those for the sake of time. But this gives you the ability to really take advantage of all of the different pieces of Espresso and scale them on BrowserStack. Here we can see the list of devices. So I'm going to filter by some older test. I can filter by project now that I've had that project name. I can filter by user, and then I can also filter by framework. So I can see multiple executions across this. I can see what this looks like once I'm done and passed. So you get a list of all the devices you've executed on. You can see the app that you tested against and the test suite that you used to run. I can see all of the request parameters that I sent through, and I can see all of the results that come with that. For each test, I'm going to get the instrumentation log. So this is the device logs that or the test logs that come with Espresso. It's going to look very similar for XCUI, and XCUI is going to be exactly the same with uploading an IPA and a test runner IPA and all the different flags in your list of devices. I can see all the screenshots that I took. I can see the network logs, and I can pull those down to my local machine with a curl statement. I can see the device logs. I could view those in the browser if I wanted to. And I can see the app profile. So I can see what the CPU is doing during the test run, the memory consumption, the battery utilization, and the network utilization during the test run. Each test gets a video. And just by using a CLI, I'm able to just point at BrowserStack and get all of these debugging tools, all of these network logs, the video, the screenshots, all just by pointing my test at BrowserStack without even having to invest a lot of manpower and a lot of software development effort into setting up infrastructure and setting up debugging tools. With Appium, it's going to be very similar. So with Appium, I only need 3 things to set up my test. I need my BrowserStack username and access key. I need my host, which is going to be hub.browserstack.com rather than pointing at an internal DNS or IP address. And I need my services set up and my device capabilities. So here, I'm going to be able to execute across multiple devices just by having a list of capabilities. And I'm going to be able to turn on debugging tools such as BrowserStack.network logs just by setting a capability. The main difference here between Selenium and Appium tests is that I'm going to pass an app. So I've already uploaded my app to BrowserStack, and I've had this hash returned. So we can see here that I have this Wikipedia sample app, and I used the BrowserStack CLI that I've been using to upload this app to BrowserStack using this command here. And so what that looks like is I'm going to run an npm run upload to BrowserStack. It's going to upload my app, and then it's going to give me that app URL. I'm going to put that app URL into my environment variable or in my variable, and then I'm going to pass that to each desired capability so it knows what to run. So now I can do npm test parallel. This is going to take my Appium test. It's going to set the build. It's going to set the project, and now I can go back to app automate. And I can see these parallel Appium tests taking place. I'm going to get the same thing. I'm going to get the text log. So as they send commands across the wire, I'm going to get each command that's being sent to the application. I can see the application that's being tested, what the app name is, what the bundle ID is. I can see all of the test metadata. So when I started the test, who started the test, whether we were testing behind the firewall with local testing or not, and what protocol was being used, whether it's Espresso, XCUI, or in this case, the mobile JSON wire protocol because we're using Appium. You can see all of the commands coming through. And as each command comes through, we can see what the latency for that command was. So I can see this command took a second. this command took less than a second, all the way to the end of the test. Each test is going to get a video, so you can see that the video is generating now that the test is done. And on top of the video, because I had network logs set, I can see the network logs. I can see the device logs. I can see the Appium logs. And I can see the app profile that came while I was executing this test. So I can see the CPU, memory, battery, and network utilization. I can see the video of the test run. And because I have an API, I have the ability to pull these assets down and pass them on to whoever needs to use them to debug. So I've gone through Espresso, I've gone through Appium with basic understanding of what it looks like to execute locally versus taking them to the cloud using our BrowserStack CLI. And I'm also using Appium with your configuration in a WebDriver IO example of how to point those at BrowserStack. I'm gonna go ahead and jump into the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes. If you have any questions that come up after this about the presentation, you wanna just hit me up and make a comment, or you just want to have a conversation, here's my contact information. You're going to have access to the slides. I'm Derek at BrowserStack.com, or you can hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn. I want to thank everybody for coming and listening to the webinar, and I hope that this is some useful information. And if you want to follow up, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll get you connected with every resource that you need in order to take advantage. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the Q&A and try to get through as many questions as possible. Is there any way to do mobile load performance testing? BrowserStack does not offer any kind of performance testing at the moment. We do have Speed Lab, which is for the web, and we'll actually take a look at how your site is loading. But from the mobile app perspective, the only performance tools that you have are how the tester is working in the application. I'm going to go ahead and hand the screen back to Praveen right now. I'm going to let him handle the Q&A because I think he's actually filtered through some of the questions.
Thanks, Derek. Let me just go back into my presentation. Awesome. So yes, Q&A. Okay. So I think I'm just going to start from the bottom. I'm sort of going through some of the most recent questions. One is, how do I use the REST API to upload the, can I use the REST API to upload the application instead of a curl command?
Yeah, so I actually demoed that with the npm command that I ran. If you watch the video again, you'll see the BrowserStack CLI command that I used to upload the app prior and to get that hash returned. So that makes it a lot easier. I definitely recommend having that on your local machine and on your CI machine to make uploading easier. And you can use that for both the XCUI and Espresso execution and for Appium execution.
Sure. The next thing is maybe you could talk a little bit about the CI/CD integrations that we have. This is specifically around Jenkins, and how do we get the results back into Jenkins? Once we
so with Jenkins, we have a CI/CD integration, which basically is going to show you, it's going to provide links and just give you a brief report on all the tests that ran, whether they passed or failed, and give you links to access the video directly in the account. The other ability that you have, and I highly recommend using and understanding the REST API. So something that I've always done is attach the commit IDs to my test results. And what that allows me to do is query my GitHub or my Bitbucket or any Git system to understand who touched this layer of code that I'm actually testing. And so if anything does fail or go wrong, I can pull down those assets and links and ship those directly to the committers that had anything to do. So all of the people involved with the test or with the test execution and the development have access to the results immediately.
Got it. There's a question around, is it possible to automate VPN connection to access protected API from our app? I'm guessing maybe they're talking about local.
Yeah, so I'm going to say yes and no to that. So VPN is going to be controlled from your side, but if you have your VPN on in a CI/CD environment or in your local testing environment, you can use BrowserStack local, which I did not demo today, but it's a binary that gets started and creates a connection to BrowserStack and allows communication to go back and forth through a secure tunnel That's something that if you had more questions and you had a use case, you could reach out to us and I could demo that for you personally. But the gist of it is that can be controlled by the CLI that comes with it. It can also be controlled within your code bindings. And so it can be something that's highly portable and just brought from service to service. And it's also built into our Jenkins plugin, our Azure DevOps plugin. So that connection can be managed through that. So yes, it can be automated.
Awesome. Okay, is it possible to automate mobile web app testing using Espresso or XCUI?
No, it is not. So if you're going to do the web application, you're going to be wanting to use Selenium/Appium. We translate those commands for you for web-only views. But if you're doing hybrid, you do have the ability to manipulate some web views with XCUI and Espresso. And there are nuances and complexities to either using Appium or XCUI Espresso with a web view, but it is possible.
Got it. Okay, a couple of questions. A couple of folks asked about Appium and integration with Cucumber and Cucumber scenarios. Basically, could you speak to that a little bit?
So actually, there are frameworks written around Appium for Cucumber. So you can use Cucumber with WebDriver IO. You can use Cucumber with Java. And so really, there's no hindrance to interacting with BrowserStack on that, because underneath Cucumber is the underlying framework that already integrates with BrowserStack using Selenium, Appium, or XCUI Espresso. And so, yes, we can integrate with Cucumber. Lots of our customers use it, and there's no problem executing on us.
Awesome. All right. What is the retention rate of all the sort of the logs, everything that you showed on the BrowserStack dashboard? Like, how long do we keep that information?
So the data is there kind of inevitably so that the test execution happened, but the assets like the videos, anything that's heavy, in order to keep our storage costs down and make sure that that's passed on to you, you have 60 days of time where those are actually held. And then there's also an archive feature. So if you've executed a certain amount of tests and you're doing thousands of tests a day, which we do have customers doing, a lot of that stuff gets archived and it is searchable. And so if you want to keep anything longer than that retention period, we do have healthcare customers and finance customers that need to keep this indefinitely for years. They end up using our APIs to actually pull those down and then store those into long-term storage somewhere.
Got it. All right. Here's a great question. How do we know tests that run on cloud devices are the same or as reliable as real devices? Any comments or any sort of potential issues with that?
At the end of the day, they're all real devices. So this is another reason I really like BrowserStack is we only use real devices. And so I haven't had any customers where I'm getting false positives of I ran this test locally and it's running differently on my local real device. It does happen differently from emulators and simulators, and I have seen things there. But typically, if you're running locally on a real device or you're running it on BrowserStack, because under the hood, it's really the same thing is happening. You're running an Espresso test, you're running an XCUI test, and we're just handling all of the operations that are kind of wrapped around it. It's going to run just as reliably.
Awesome. Great. I think just one note before we try to finish, a few more questions, folks. The team will be putting up a poll. So please do take your time to answer that. If you need to reach out to anyone in the BrowserStack sales engineering team, to help with your solution, to help you get set up on BrowserStack, we'd be happy to help. So there will be a poll that will be visible on your screen. Just take a moment to answer that, and if you'd like us to reach out to you and help you get set up, happy to do that for you. All right. Okay. Let's see. Can the test results be sent to external reporting platforms, or does it stay inside of BrowserStack?
Not only do we have an internal reporting mechanism called test analytics, and so you can actually go and see your test, all of your test executions across all of our core products. But you do have the ability to pull out these device logs, network car files, videos, screenshots. All of those can be pulled down with the API. And those can be sent to any kind of internal systems. And then you can use something like Grafana or any kind of data platform to actually be able to search through those and to seek patterns if that's something that you want to do.
Awesome. All right. Any limitations on how many users can run mobile automated tests in parallel?
No, the only limitation is by the number of parallels that you order. So we have customers that are executing thousands of tests a day across multiple organizations throughout their testing and development organizations. So you're only limited by the number that you actually purchase. And that's what's really cool about BrowserStack is, in theory, it's an unlimited amount of testing that you can possibly do. We are at our time, so I want to thank everybody personally for coming to the webinar. It's super awesome to really have you come listen to this, and I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see some of you out here as customers as you go ahead and use some of the free trial to see how good this is.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. And folks, just stay tuned for our upcoming webinar. We have Roy Decline, who's a sort of a very popular consultant who's helped many organizations put in place their test automation. So please do take the time to attend our webinar coming up on 31st of August. We will also be just sharing a quick NPS survey. So please do share the feedback. As soon as I end the meeting, the survey will show up on your screen. It just takes you 30 seconds to fill that out. So we'd love to hear from you on how you found this particular webinar. Thank you all again for your time. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Derek.